and trends of the festive era in the 1920s. The 1920s was the most empowering time for women. They broke away from housewife duties and moved to cities. Because of World War I, women were needed to take men's jobs such as factory workers and teachers. They gained respect because they could contribute to society as much as men could. After World War I, everyone was happy and cheerful, and they expressed this through vibrant, colorful, and electrifying wardrobe. Men and women no longer felt the need to dress as formal as they did before, and comfort became a high part of fashion. The song that's playing, called Masculine Women, Feminine Men, reflects the men and women in the 1920s because women became more masculine by doing things such as tying down their breasts and shortening their hair to appear more like men. And thus, as a result, men became more feminine. In our thesis, fashions of the 1920s were not only an expression of the post-war spirit, but a symbol of the new woman and her drive for equality and independence. Now let's get started with the fashion show. First, we have Carolina modeling a casual, typical summer dance party outfit. As you can see, hemlines have risen and the dress has almost no waistline. For the first time, women's legs were seen with hemlines rising to the knee. She is dressed in bright colors as most women did during this era. She was also wearing a wide-brimmed hat, which was very popular in the beginning of the 1920s. Wide hats covered hair, which supported the fact that they wanted to be more like men. As for footwear, the most commonly seen shoes were low-heeled, fairly dressy shoes. Now we have Macy modeling a flapper dress. The flapper style was the biggest style icon representing the new woman. These dresses were used to dance in and go to jazz clubs or parties. As you can see, the dress is worn loose and baggy, allowing for more freedom of movement for dancing. Dresses like this had a rebellious aspect and had a sex appeal because they were more showy. Now we will look at the attire of a young boy. Boys usually wore collared shirts, flannel, and wool. They also wore two-tone shoes, which were mainly white with an opposing color. High-waisted shorts were also a popular trend for young boys because they like to show off their fancy socks. Guys also usually had short hair, which they slicked back. Now we look again at Carolina, who's modeling a fancy yellow dress. By this time, corsets were officially out of style. Also, silk was one of the most desired materials for women. As you can see, garments were being made out of lively colors. The pearl necklace she's wearing was a very stylish jewelry item in the 1920s. Extravagant and ornamental headpieces also were common accessories. Macy modeling the look of a gangster. Gangsters wore pinstripes and could be recognized in a suit and a fedora. This type of clothing symbolized criminal. Gangsters usually carried guns with them secretly as well. Gangsters' attire consisted of quality, high-fashion apparel. The most famous gangster during this era was Al Capone. Finally, we have Kristen modeling our last outfit for the day, which is a flower dress. She's wearing a cloche hat, which was the most popular accessory of the 1920s for women. Also, dresses during this time were made of a variety of fabrics, increasing the diversity in fashion. As you can see, many dresses had a combination of colors, which often reflected the mood and feelings of the women.
Okay, so our first quote to describe the boys of the 1920s that connects to the Great Gatsby is, "He was now decently clothed in a sport shirt open at the neck, sneakers, and duck trousers of a nebulous hue." This quote is from the Great Gatsby, and we decided that we wanted to grab some quotes from the Great Gatsby to show that we could connect the 1920s fashions with the Great Gatsby.
And then we have our other quote here representing the women's wear. "Gaudy with primary colors in hair shorn in straight in straight new ways, and shawls beyond the dreams of Castile. So this was when people were getting ready to go to Gatsby's parties, and they were in the bathrooms or in the powder rooms getting ready, and all the swimmers were coming in from the day's swim. And then the Dreams of Castile, that is a castle or a kingdom in north central Spain, and an illusion is shown here to compare the extravagance of all of the fabrics and the extravagant fashions to that of an extravagant kingdom.
Okay, and then we connected this to music and media, but it wasn't as much a response to music and media as it was inspired by it, because music and media at the time was just as exciting and new and thriving with energy that the fashion was, and the fact that the radio had come out and that it'd been circulating gossip and entertainment, it helped the women of the time be able to express themselves just as much. And the music also was, it was a big help to them because, well, it wasn't a help, but they could relate to each other because they're both rebellious and they're both kind of vanguards of the time, and they both represented a new music that represented America and a new woman that represented America.
Okay, and so for how the fashions came about, changes in the styling of like the day wear more than any other area of dress paved the way for the post-war fashion. From 1916 and through the 1920s, many designers focused on easy-to-wear clothing. Men's sporting clothing also became increasingly acceptable as casual wear, and demarcations between town and country dress and day and evening wear gradually started to blur. So instead of like changing your outfit like for each part of the day, that kind of like decreased, where people became able to wear like the same thing throughout the entire day. And then for the girls, young Gabrielle Chanel, who started her career in Paris, did the most to transform the design of fashion wartime dress by noting and developing these trends to more casual and sporty clothing. So from 1916 through the 1920s, as many men joined the war, women had to undertake their jobs and work in hospitals. So women became more masculine in that they were able to take the jobs that men would normally have. And so during the 1920s, fashion followed two courses, the traditionally more feminine wear and the more modernist wear. And the more feminine wear was kind of like more dreamy like clothing, and the more popular, or the fashion that dominated the 1920s, was the modernist wear, and it was more such as like, it focused on kind of like a progressive young woman who leaves her family in like the pursuit of her own independence, and that's how kind of like the flapper look came about. And when men came back from the war, they expected like women to make way for them and just like go out of their jobs so that way the men could take the jobs again. But women did not want this. A lot of women cut their hair to look more masculine, and kind of this took a stance to show that they were not gonna just move out of the way so that way men could take their jobs back. And in 1924, a designer named Patou in Paris endeared himself into the U.S. market by importing 6 athletic-looking women to model his clothes in Paris. So that just kind of tells you right there that women, American women especially, kind of had a newfound independence. And so fashions of the 1920s essentially came about for 3 reasons. One being that women wanted to express their newfound freedoms. 2 being that everyone was happy that the war was over and people wanted to relax in easy-to-wear clothing. And thirdly, life in the cities was becoming fast-paced and pleasure-seeking, so this new lifestyle set a new set of fun-living fashions.
Okay, so fashion, as all of you probably know, had a really big influence on society and made both men and women more conscious of their actions and how they perceived each other. The the actual act of women being able to wake up in the morning and actually pick what they wanted to wear, whether they wanted to, wear one of these dresses, or if they were going out at night and they dressed up in their flapper costumes, it represented how women got more freedom for themselves, so they didn't have to wake up every morning and go like, oh, well, I'm just going to run my family today and clean my house, and that's my life. They actually because they got to go out and work more, they got choices. They got to decide what they wanted to wear, they got to decide if they wanted to work or not, and they got to decide how they dictate themselves instead of standing in the shadow of their husbands. One of the most influential women figures of the time were movie stars because, as you guys know, the films started coming about, and with those films came the actors and the actresses. And one of the biggest influences was the female movie star because all of the men wanted to be with her and admired her and thought she was gorgeous, and all the women wanted to dress like her. So whatever female movie stars wore is pretty much what dictated what all the rest of the women of society wore. And with that, when women dressed more provocatively, men viewed them differently. Yes, they gained more respect, but at the same time, it sort of objectified them. And I'll go back to that a little bit later. It also, some of the men thought differently about them, and the women, because of the rebellions of the 18th Amendment and things like that, one of the most easiest ways for them to show their rebellion, not only through their actions, but it was through what they wore. And so with more of the choices that they got, they could decide if they wanted to go out and drink with all the men, or if they were on a date with a boy and they wanted to go all the way. And so with all those choices, the men we can probably assume, were a lot more open to women and probably liked them a little bit more because of those. But conversely, a lot of society had influence on the fashions. Because during the time of World War I, when more weaponry was needed, like the assembly line was perfected, and markets and production made it easier for clothes to be produced, and also advertising came about, so it was easier to get the word spread around in a city about the new fashions or what's up and coming. So women who were middle class could now buy clothes that were trendy and fashionable, but not having to spend millions of dollars on it. Also, the war, as all of you know, the war allowed women to get into jobs more, so that allowed them to buy more clothes. Another influence was the women's suffrage, which once again leads back to choices. Women had more choices. With more choices, you get more freedom. So women were now allowed to step up to the plate and voice their opinions. Which also led to the rebellions of them, hanging around the gangsters and being involved in the black market with selling the liquor. But also one of the main contradictions of this time period of women's fashion was, yes, women were allowed to have more choices, and with that, they gained more respect from the men, and they were allowed to, step up to the plate, and they were allowed to take charge of their families and do what they wanted. But at the same time, because they were ladies like the flappers who showed more skin and dressed more provocatively, a lot of men objectified them more and thought of them as mainly just sex symbols. And that's when the sex symbol pretty much came about, was when the flappers came.
So in conclusion, our thesis that Caleb stated earlier, the fashion of 1920s were not only an expression of the post-war spirit, but a symbol of the new woman and our drive for equality and independence. It relates back to the fact that, as a result of the war, we become a major part of society. We've taken over for the men, and we proved to them that we were important and we could contribute. And we gained respect from that. And when they came back from the war, they expected us to just go back to our wifely duties, and so they could take over their jobs. But with that taste of respect that we'd gotten, we didn't want to give it up. And the fashion was really a statement to society, telling that we were just as equal as men, we could do just what they did, and that we wanted the respect that we deserved. Okay. We're not doing it. Thank you guys, but before we conclude our presentation, we want to share some fun facts.